Hey guys, J.Anthony here. Welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to do a review between the Rolex Submariner and the Omega Seamaster. The Omega Seamaster you see to the right is actually the same watch that I did a review on probably about 4 years ago now. The watch that I gave to my father for Father's Day. So the watch had a bunch of reliability issues, but as you can see, it's running now and it's been running for the last couple of years, so we're good on that point. Before we get the review started, these two are not the ideal versions of themselves for this review. So the Rolex, as you probably can tell, is a 16613, which is gold. Preferably it'd be showing you a 16610. I do have a review of a 16610 I used to own, the stainless steel version. However, that watch is no longer available. I sold it. So for this point, the gold, just remember, has no relevance to diving. And the Omega in this situation is the Omega with the quartz movement. And while this is authentic to the Bond series and the GoldenEye movie, for example, for this comparison, let's just pretend that this is actually the mechanical movement. And the mechanical equivalent of this watch should be using the 1120 Omega movement. That's a movement based on the ETA 2892A2. So with all that said, let's go ahead and get this started. So as I started off with my comparison of the Seiko Monster and the Rolex Sub, let's go ahead and do the same thing. As I mentioned in that before, the Rolex uses a 120 click diving bezel. And as I've mentioned in every video I've reviewed of this watch, this bezel is awesome. It feels very, very smooth. It just feels very precise and it's very well made. And it's extremely easy to turn because you have this coin edge bezel right here, which is just very easy to grip. And you can just turn it with great ease, and it's very sturdy. It's not going to get bumped accidentally when you're underwater. And it serves its function very well. Now this Rolex does have a sapphire crystal on it, as does the Omega, and you can probably see it's picking up some reflections. Unlike Breitling, Rolex does not use anti-reflective coatings on their crystals, so it is kind of annoying when you get that kind of reflection on the watch. Here you have another very reflective crystal. Omega also does not use anti-reflective coatings on this model. Also sapphire, and as with the Rolex, it's 120 clicks, but it's significantly harder to get it going. Once you get it going, it's pretty good, but it's nowhere near as easy to turn as the Rolex. And some of that too is it also uses a coin type bezel, but as you can see hopefully on this video, the Rolex has far more grip points than the Omega does, so the Rolex is thereby far easier to turn. So you can turn the Omega, but it's again nowhere near as easy to turn as the Rolex. Now one of the other things you might notice immediately is while the Rolex has a single crown, as does the Omega, a lot of people also notice that there's this accessory crown on the Omega, and a lot of people don't know what that is. So, and especially if they actually go to play with it and just open it, it doesn't appear to do anything. So what that crown actually is a helium escape valve. So if you've taken this watch diving, you can actually get helium gas can build up inside the watch. And if you come back up to the surface and are decompressing, it's actually possible that that helium gas could blow the crystal out of the watch. And to stop that from happening, you can open this valve and that will release the helium gas from the watch. So that's what that thing does, if any of you were ever curious what it did. The Rolex does not have one of those, and reason being is Rolex obviously doesn't feel it's necessary. And given that both of these watches will probably never be taken to the depths that they're rated at, that's understandable. But again, that's just kind of what that does. So I guess the next point we can talk about would be the crowns. So Rolex uses their trip lock crown. And as you can see, there's the Rolex crown and the 3 dots, trip lock. Trip lock means it's watertight. So first it's going to be screw down. And second, if we can get this thing here, you'll see that there's a little rubber gasket right there. And that rubber gasket makes that crown watertight. The Omega also uses a screw down crown. The Omega crown is marked with the Omega symbol, just in case you were curious. And as you might be able to see here, there is no visible gasket on the Omega crown. Now I assume there is some kind of a gasket inside the crown itself. I don't know that for sure, so if somebody does know that, please feel free to comment and let me know. Speaking of functions of the crown, Omega is very similar to the Rolex. If you pull it all the way out, the movement is hacking. Like the Omega, the Rolex is also hacking. So if you pull the crown all the way out. It'll stop ticking, and that allows you to actually freeze the second hands at, say, 12 o'clock, so you can perfectly set time to match a clock of reference. And the Rolex is also hand winding here. Now, again, for this comparison, I don't have the automatic equivalent of the Omega, but if we wanted to talk about that hypothetically, here's how that would play out. If we had, again, an automatic equipped Seamaster versus this Rolex, which is automatic only. So the Rolex uses the Rolex in-house 3135 movement, 31 joules, 50-hour power reserve, 28,800 beats per hour. The Omega, in the equivalent automatic, would be using the 1120 movement, and that's based on the ETA 2892A2 movement, and that's going to give you 23 joules compared to the Rolex's 31. And actually, Omega modifies that ETA movement from the factory. The 2892 is only a 21 joule movement, to my understanding. So they add 2 joules to it, and they bump it up to the same beats per hour as the Rolex, 28,800, and it has about a 44-hour power reserve. So movement for movement, the Rolex would have, even an automatic to automatic, would have superior specs to the Omega. And again, the Rolex movement's an in-house movement. The Omega movement is a modified ETA movement, which, being that Omega and ETA are both owned by the Swatch Group, I guess you could say, well, they're under the same umbrella, so you could play that game if you wanted to. Date-wise, Rolex has their traditional Cyclops over the date. If you get a Rolex Sea Dweller, they do not have the Cyclops on those. The Omega not having a Cyclops, you can see the date's not quite as large on the Omega. Dial-A on these watches, as you can tell, is very, very similar. They use circular hour markers on them. For the most part, their dial layout, they both had their model, their depth rating, and the name of the watch and their logo on the top. They're, again, very similar looking watches. I guess I'd say in a lot of ways I suspect the Omega was inspired by the Rolex. Depth rating wise, they're both good to 300 meters or 1,000 feet. Bracelet wise, the Omega uses push pins on this model. So I guess a couple things. So I've mentioned in other videos fluidity, and both of these watches are pretty fluid. They don't get crinkled or caught on things. Clasp for clasp, newer Rolexes have a superior clasp in my mind than this Omega, but given these both watches are about 10 years old or so, this is back when Rolex used their stamp clasp, which, as I've said in every video I've ever reviewed, I think it's an awful clasp, but the new ones are very nice. And I don't know if we can see the dot or not. There's actually a divers extension back here that you can release. The Omega, the bracelet itself, again, uses push pins, whereas the Rolex, where is it? Uses screwed out links. I apologize about the focus here. So the Rolex has a superior bracelet on that respect. Screw out links are much preferred to push pins. They're extremely easy to adjust with a screwdriver versus push pins can be kind of a pain, and it's just a higher quality feature. The Omega in this case, again, at this vintage, has a superior clasp in my mind. This is a nice machined piece versus, again, this stamped fold over. And the Omega, they actually mark it back here as well, Seamaster Professional. This has a divers extension as well, as such. And again, a divers extension just gives you a little extra length on the bracelet so that it will fit over a dive suit. Case back, we have the traditional Omega case back. There's the Seahorse Seamaster logo. Nice, and it's got a little bit of a kind of an engine turning feel beneath it. It's got a nice texture to it. Quite a nice case back. Rolex, traditional stamped case back. Nothing going on there, nothing to see. There would have been a green sticker there at one point, but those things erode away with time and they just get taken off eventually. Size-wise, as you can see, they're about the same size. The Omega wears slightly larger, and the reason that you might be able to tell in this is the Omega has a larger dial to bezel ratio. So the Rolex has a thick bezel and a slightly smaller face in terms of the overall circumference, whereas the Omega has a slightly larger face and a slightly skinnier bezel. You know, size for size, I believe the Rolex is exactly 40 mil and the Omega is about 41 and a half. But again, the Omega wears slightly larger. And again, the reason for that is especially the size of the dial. Speaking of the Omega dial has a wave pattern on it, which I don't know if I'll be able to pick up on this camera. You might be able to get it there. There it is. It's got a really cool kind of wave texture pattern to it, and you can see hopefully too that the Omega logo is raised, which is pretty nice. The Rolex, on the other hand, and I apologize, this is such a reflective watch, it just has a flat black dial, and the logo for the Rolex crown is not applied. It is just a flat print. So hopefully that'll kind of give you a sense of that. So again, that's generally how these two watches compete. They're both good to 1,000 feet. Again, movement per movement, assuming this Omega was equipped with the 1120 Omega movement, that would be a 23 joule, 44-hour power reserve, 28,800 beat per hour movement based on ETA 2892. The Rolex is a 31 joule versus, again, the Omega's 23 joule. Has a 50-hour power reserve versus the Omega's 44 power hour reserve, and they're both 28,800 beats per hour roughly. So assuming this was the automatic equipped Seamaster, you would get the same tick you're getting on this sub right now, which is again a very smooth, gentle sweep. Lower beat per hour movements such as the Seiko Monster, if you want to look at that review, you're not going to get that smooth of a sweep going around the dial. Anyway guys, that's pretty much how they stack up. For my money, I'm still a Rolex guy at heart, and I like the in-house movements. I think of this era watch, I think the Omega had a superior case than the Rolex. Rolex has come a long way, however, since then, and my money would still be on the Rolex. That said, that's just my opinion. They're both wonderful dive watches, and the Rolex still commands a higher price premium, so you tend to get more value with the Omega, although Omega has been consistently raising their prices in a way to get more competitive with Rolex pricing. So again, you really can't go wrong with either of these watches. They're both wonderful pieces. They both have their little quirks, but again, can't go wrong with either. Hope you enjoyed the review. If you liked it, please give me a thumbs up. If you hated it, feel free to tell me why you didn't like it. I'm open to your feedback always. If you haven't already, please comment and subscribe to me as well. Comments are much appreciated, and subscriptions keep you tuned in for future content. And future content suggestions are always welcome, so let me know what you'd like to see and what you'd like to know more about. Thank you all so much.